Hello, YouTube pagans, and also the seekers of spirituality or the curious in mind who are just passing through. And hello to anyone who may have accidentally clicked on this video and is wondering, what the hell did I just click on? Welcome. It is the YouTube Pagan Challenge Week 6, and the theme is, what are your cultural influences? We'll dive right in. On my father's side, I'm descended from German Mennonites from Russia, and also once they immigrated to the United States, they intermarried with people of Native American and English ancestry. On my mother's side, I am Mexican and Hispanic. My grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side, took genetic testing for like the DNA Ancestry Project, and they found that they have a strong R1b haplogroup, I have to pronounce that correctly, which is a Western European genetic marker, and then also haplogroup B, which is Indigenous Americans. And so I have quite the diverse ancestry. It's interesting that on both sides of the family, I do have traces of New World genetic markers. However, we know the most about the Mennonite ancestry on that side of my family, especially along the paternal line. So they have the best records that are written that go back about 10 generations. Well, exactly 10 generations from me. That's my 7X great-grandfather, which really only goes back to the 1730s. And then after that, we really don't have an idea of what my ancestors were doing in Central and Northern Europe. But at least on that side of the family, it is important to know your history. And that's not just family history, but history in general. And so how this applies to me as a Druid is, I think with the Druids, their major focus is knowledge and history. There's even a bardic aspect that comes into play in that, and that your knowledge of history is very significant, and it's very powerful to know where you came from, especially if you're working with the ancestors. And a lot of you might be asking, what is a Mennonite? Basically, let's put it in the simplest terms to keep this short. Most of you know what the Amish are. Amish, they really don't use any technology. That, like, they must do everything by the work of their hands. And by doing so, in their interpretation, they're doing the Lord's work. The Mennonites and the Amish have a common origin, post-Reformation, in northwestern Europe on the continent. And so there are two main groups of Mennonites today. That there are Swiss Mennonites, and there are a lot of people who are Swiss Mennonite. I think many of them emigrated to the New World hundreds of years ago, like the 1600s. And then maybe after that, but a lot of them came along with the Amish, the Pennsylvania Dutch. They have a lot in common with them, though one of the key differences is that you will find a lot of Mennonites will allow the use of technology. And it's a sliding scale. It really depends on their personal ancestry and practice and tradition. So some of them, like the average person, won't be able to tell the difference between like an old world Mennonite and an Amish person. They'll be almost indistinguishable. And then the other branch of Mennonites is the one that I'm from, are generally called Russian Mennonites, though very few actually have any Russian ancestry. It's just that they emigrated from the Germanic countries into the Russian Empire, and a large part of that is what is now Ukraine. About 200 years ago, Ukraine was just part of the Russian Empire, and to make my own family ancestry confusing is that they refer to all of it as just Russia. And so it's like I have to think about like the place names and everything and thinking, okay, this is Ukraine that they're talking about, not the modern country of Russia. But while they were in Europe, and I don't think it matters if it was Swiss Mennonites or Russian Mennonites, that one of the important tenets of their cultural identity was that they were exempt from military service. And so they were very pacifistic in nature. And to me, as a Druid, that's something that's still very important to me. I do have a lot of cultural traits that reflect my Mennonite ancestry, not so much my spiritual traits. Though some of the other cultural traits that they had, at least as far as my understanding of my Russian Mennonite ancestry is concerned, they had a strong connection to the land. They were able to take some land that was useless, was infertile, and they could grow successful crops on it. They were very good like land engineers. I know in the Low Countries, a lot of them were involved in building the dikes along the coast of the North Sea, and so they also believed in a lot of hard work. And the problem was that they were very persecuted for many of their beliefs, particularly their military exemption. And so they were persecuted a lot for that, and that's why they ultimately ended up here in the United States. I have a lot of relatives that are in Manitoba, up in Canada, and also Kansas, and I know lots of them moved down to South America, and even to Mexico. There are Russian Mennonite colonies where they still speak German. There's actually a dialect of Low German, and it's its own language. It's very different from the German that you'd learn in schools. I think it depends. Like some of them tend to be conservative, and some of them tend to be very liberal as far as their spiritual beliefs. And I know that the liberal ones tend to be champions of social justice and fighting for social change, and mostly because they really don't want anyone to be persecuted, because they saw persecution in the past, and they think that it's unfair for anyone to be persecuted. So it's interesting to see the internal disputes of the Mennonite community, how some people kind of disagree on some fundamental details. But anyway, those are my cultural influences in a nutshell. I do wish I could learn more about my Native American ancestry. I do know that they were, I believe they were Choctaw and Cherokee, and I know that some of my ancestors that were of Native American descent fought for the Confederates in the American Civil War. And because of that, after the war was over, they were basically excommunicated from the Cherokee Nation. And so it's really hard to do research on that side of the family because of that. And then, of course, they had a really common last name that, I mean, it was, they'd integrated with the English for some time, and so their last name was Brown. And so, I mean, that being a very common last name, there was not much that we can do to research that. And then same with the indigenous ancestry on my Mexican side of the family. And then my grandfather on that side, his last name is also extremely common in Hispanic cultures as well. So, and they really don't know much about that because my grandpa was orphaned at age 7, and my grandmother was mostly raised by her Irish-American step-grandmother. And so it's unfortunate in the fact that on my Hispanic side, my grandparents they're still alive. They don't speak Spanish. My grandpa, of course, his first language is English, and he picked up German in school. So it's a very interesting family dynamic, and I am proud of it despite not really knowing a whole lot of details about it. But the Mennonite ancestry is something that I can really focus in on, given how much information we have on it. I mean, we've got family members who've written books and journals, and they've been translated from German into the Low German into English, and so there's just a ton of information and so many stories about being in the old country. Those. There's one of my older videos that you'll see that it's called Mennonite Stories at Lunch, which I believe was filmed in 1980 by my grandfather. So he was into video production as well. Just jeepers, that was like 35 years ago. So it's interesting what the things that they talk about, it shows, I think, my grandmother and my great grandmother, who is she is certainly part Cherokee, and then my Mennonite great grandfather. Blah 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 blah. I'm rambling, so we're just gonna cut the video here. I lost my train of thought, so sorry for the jump cut, but we're gonna end it there. So thank you for watching. See you next week.